Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. After we've been on a break for a while, we're happy to welcome you all back to our channel, Public Health in Real Life, a platform where we hope to celebrate unsung heroes from the field, inspire the next generation of global public health leaders, and highlight stories from the field. Today, we have with us Lanice Williams, a gender integration specialist, as we celebrate International Women's Day 2022. Lanice Williams has spent over 10 years working to advance health and gender equity across the United States, Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. She currently serves as the Gender Integration Specialist at Encompass LLC. She also serves as an adjunct lecturer at her alma mater, Howard University in Washington, D.C. Prior to this, Lanice also worked at Friends of the Global Fight Against AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria, and as an advocacy and partnerships manager. She also served as a 2016 to 2017 Global Health Core Fellow at Global Health Council, where she worked as a policy associate and worked in the government of the District of Columbia. Lanice, as you know, wears many hats, and she also currently serves as the co-chair for Women in Global Health DC chapter, co-chair for the Young Professionals Program with United Nations Association National Capital Area, UNANCA, and is a member of the American Public Health Association. She has spoken on many panels, including one for Pathfinder International, Women in Global Health, and at the APA's 2017 and 2020 annual convening. Her work on gender equity has been published in MS Magazine and Just Security. You're welcome to the channel today, Lanice.
Thank you for having me.
So International Women's Day is celebrated every year on March 8th, and the theme for this year is Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow. The UN has also stated that advancing gender equality in the context of the climate crisis and disaster risk reduction is one of the greatest global challenges of the 21st century. Some of the UN stats as it relates to climate change and gender equality states that 70% of the 1.3 billion people living in conditions of poverty are women. In urban areas, 40% of the poorest households are headed by women. And it also says that 80% of the displaced by climate-related disasters and changes around the world are women and girls. And lastly, climate change may lead to more gender-based violence as an increase in child marriages and worsening sexual and reproductive health. So Lanice, to just kick off International Women's Day today, I would like to ask you, what do you think have been some of the challenges that your work in gender equality have been over the last decade?
I would say thinking about some of those challenges, I would say we've seen a lot more challenges since the COVID-19 pandemic have started. For example, we've seen an exponential increase in violence against women and girls, particularly, due to a lot of the lockdowns and a lot of the movement restrictions that were put in place in many countries. We've seen an uptick in a lot of domestic violence and other forms of gender-based violence cases amongst women and girls. I would say, with COVID, a lot of not only with violence, but also how it has impacted other health programs. For example, when we think about HIV/AIDS, when COVID started, we've seen challenges around how HIV preventative programs were done. For example, with a lot of the restrictions, you couldn't really go and do a lot of those in-person preventative programs. At least from the treatment side, a lot of countries went to multi-drug dispensary where you can get your antiretrovirals in a 6-month period. So you will still at least be able to have treatment. But when it came to preventative programs that address a lot of the various inequalities and barriers for how adolescent girls and young women access HIV preventative services, we also saw that. We also saw with COVID, there has also been an increase in how women are able to access certain economic opportunities. We saw that a lot of the work for many women in many countries, especially outside of the United States, when we think about Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, to name a few, we know that the majority of women work in the informal sector. And with a lot of the lockdown restrictions, of course, we know that if someone doesn't work, especially if you're working in the informal sector, you're not able to provide for your family. You're not able to purchase food to make sure that you and your family are eating. So we also saw a lot of challenges in that sense. And we also know that women do a large majority of the unpaid care work, whether it's taking care of a relative or their children, et cetera. And we also see that a lot of women, even in the formal sector, have left the formal work sector to kind of find a better balance with taking care of their children, because we know that many women that are also working, whether you're in the formal or informal sector, you're still also going back home in the evening and taking care and providing for your family as well as your children.
Thank you for that response, Lanice. And, you know, we would like to even actually take it back and go to the basics. We talk about gender equality. What does that really mean? And in global health, you often hear of equity versus equality. So how does that translate to your work in gender integration?
Yeah, so when we think about gender equality just basically means equal outcomes. So we think about rights, responsibilities, and opportunities for men, women, boys, and all gender diverse people, right? While equity, on the other hand, just basically means the fairness of treatment for men, women, according to their respective needs. So for example, when we think about equity, equity means more so fairness, making sure that everyone, regardless of how you identify by your gender, you are treated fairly and equally, right? While equality, on the other hand, is making sure there's equal outcomes regardless of someone's gender identity. So it's making sure that they have access, they're all given the same access to various resources, they're all given equal access based on where their circumstances might be when it comes to their rights, responsibilities, and so forth. So I think depending on who you ask, some people might say they prefer equity over equality, but also know that gender equity also leads to that process that achieves equality as well.
Yeah, that's definitely a lot of food for thought. Like you said, in you have those in the camp of equity and those in the camp of equality. And especially when we talk about gender equality. So since the Beijing Declaration, you know, several decades ago, we have seen some of the greatest, we have seen an increase in gender equality, like you would say. But what would you say have been some of the greatest gains in gender equality and women empowerment since that Beijing Declaration?
Yeah, I would say I've seen a couple of things. I think 5 come to mind, but I might not go through all 5 of them. But I would say, as we know, it's been like 26, 27 years since the Beijing Declaration. We know that originally the 25th anniversary celebration was supposed to take place in 2020, but of course, due to COVID, it was pushed to last year in 2021. So I would say some of the things that I would say I've seen is basically the gains around girls' rights. We've known, like, although there were various conventions that existed, like the Convention on the Rights of Child, we know that basically with the Beijing Declaration, it really led to people really starting to focus on a lot of the discrimination that exists among adolescent girls and what are the things that needs to be done around their specific protection for their rights. Some other things we've noticed since the declaration, it's really caused a lot of people, organizations, and countries to really put a particular attention on gender perspectives when it comes to policy and programming. Or another way to think about that is gender mainstreaming, which just basically means that making sure the needs of both men and women are diversely considered in various policies, programs, strategies, as well as research. I would say another place we've seen it and it's really led to advancing the agenda on ending violence against women. We've seen since the Beijing Declaration, a lot of countries has really focused on passing legislation, which is basically just policies that really focus on ending violence against women. Of course, we know that the data still shows that violence still persists. Of course, we've seen, as we call it during the COVID pandemic, the increase in violence known as the shadow pandemic. We've seen an exponential increase in that. But I would also say, while we've seen advancing the agenda on ending violence against women, I would also say that's still a lingering challenge that many countries are really trying to work through. I would also say we've seen like things around really unleashing and unlocking the power of women leadership, really the thought, the way women lead, knowing that they can basically lead not only programs, but lead countries and nations through some of the most toughest challenges. We've seen that in COVID-19 pandemic with the Prime Minister of New Zealand or Angela Merkel in Germany, and just their level of leadership, along with many other women leaders, how they really led their countries through the challenging moments of COVID, which we're not quite over this pandemic yet. And then, of course, I would say one other thing that comes to me is also solidifying women's leadership in conservation and climate action, and just really a lot of women that really not only understand these issues deeply, but are really driving to create change in their country, because we know that gender, while it is sometimes siloed, gender shows up in so many different areas, and it's a cross-cutting issue.
You know, you touched on leadership challenges, both the gains and challenges, and it is very interesting that, like you noted with, like, you know, climate change and conservatorship is part of the women stats say, UN stats says that, you know, women predominate in the world's food production, actually up to 50 to 80%, but they own less than 10% of the land. And then when you even come to healthcare, women usually make up about 75% of the health workforce, or hold less than 25% of leadership positions. What would you say are two major barriers to women assuming leadership positions, even though they do the bulk of the work?
I was about to talk and realized I was muted. So I would say, I just think, just thinking about some of the challenges when it comes to women's leadership, I just think there is still a lot of barriers that are still in place that prevent oftentimes women from moving up into leadership positions. For example, there might be things around discrimination or racism, right? Often, for example, when we think about Black women and women of color compared to their white or other counterparts, oftentimes have to work twice as hard just to get to where they are. I think really and truly leaders that are much more established really need to think about how can they relinquish their power and their privilege that they might have and given a space for someone else, right? If someone is below you, they have great ideas, you really see their leadership potential, and you know they can make a great impact. How are you stepping aside to create opportunity and room for them to move up the ladder as well? I think so. Those are some of the things I think that really come to mind around like women's leadership.
Yeah, and I do appreciate that you not only highlighted the challenges, but you also talked about the solutions as well, which, you know, what would have been my next leading question. So I think we'll just, you know, take that focus and shed light on some of your work. What really inspires your work in gender equality and gender integration? And can you share one impactful story from the field?
I would say what really inspired my work, or I would say the person that really inspired my work, would be my late grandmother, Edna James. When I lived in Jamaica, my grandmother helped to raise me. I would say she was the one that really showed me what it is to be a leader, what it means to set aside who I am, my privilege, and just be committed to creating change within my community, right? Whether it's in my community within Jamaica or within the US, I really see myself as a global citizen, and I'm always very much so passionate about how am I creating change, but also creating safe space for not only my community, but how am I creating impact for my community, especially those of African descent and within the African diaspora. I would say my grandmother showed me what it is to be an advocate, to really advocate for change. Because I feel like if you're even on the policy side or the programmatic side of things, advocacy is a key thing that's really going to help take your work far. I would say when I think about a story of impact, and it's not really about my direct impact, but I would say in my former position when I was working with Friends of the Global Fight, we worked directly with the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria. So it was very much heavily global health policy and advocacy focused, working with members of Congress in the US House of Representatives and Senate, working with other country governments, working with civil society, the private sector, as well as youth, along with the faith-based community as well. And one of the things I think about is in December of 2018, I have to think about the year because I feel like pre-pandemic, everything just seems really long ago. I had the opportunity to travel to South Africa. And while I was there, I met an advocate, South African. She's also one of my really great friends, Sibulele Sabaka. And I happened to just see her in action. And I knew at my office, we were really talking about really finding powerful advocates that from other countries that we can bring to the US to meet with members of Congress. And I remember it was her and another advocate who I'm also friends with too now, Martha Clara Nakato from Uganda. And just really bringing them here and just also having them just seeing their story, sharing their stories, right? When we think about when you're meeting with decision makers that are holding high levels of political power, oftentimes when they see these issues and they hear these things, right? A lot of the times you're just seeing these things as numbers, but really having to be able to bring someone that can really speak to what their work, what they're seeing on the ground, and how investments, whether it's from the US government or other country governments, has really led to creating some form of change, right? It might not be where something is completely eradicated because there's still a lot of more things that needs to get done, but just showing them of this is the level of impact that we've seen and changed through these investments and why we still need these investments to continue and what that will look like in the long run.
Thank you for sharing that story, Lanice. The International Women's Day campaign for this year is #BreakTheBias. So I would ask you, how are you breaking the bias in your work and personal life?
I would say how I'm breaking the bias in my work and my personal life is I'm really just a person, whether it's professionally or personally, just always thinking about how I can create space for others, others that especially that are coming behind me, right? We know that the youth are the ones that are gonna, I'm not saying I'm old, but we know that youth are gonna really lead to a lot of great changes that we wanna see around gender, around health, around racial things, food insecurity, agriculture, you name it. I would say for me, how I'm breaking the bias is I'm letting my work speak for itself, right? I'm thinking about how can I work to change people's perceptions or thought or have them see things from a different perspective. I feel like oftentimes we hear things or we see things, or sometimes we hear people say we're a product of our environment, right? If we hear people sow words of hate, or we hear people talk about a particular community or discriminate against a particular group of people, you know, that's what we're used to. But it's really, for me, I'm really thinking about how am I, again, I'm a person like, I know what power I might have, but I'm also comfortable with relinquishing my power and passing it on to someone else because I don't think I'm the smartest person in the world, and I want to surround myself with people that might even be much more smarter than me or have a higher intellect than me, because at the same time, I'm also learning from them. So I would say those are some ways how I'm breaking the bias in my work and professional life.
You raised an important point where you said letting the work speak for itself. So what advice do you have for people who might be struggling, especially in terms of gender equality, to let their work speak for itself or don't necessarily have the platforms to showcase their work?
So I would say like some ways I think about that is, don't get me wrong, I'm human. I have my moments. I mean, even right now, I have my moments where I'm really dealing with imposter syndrome and just really questioning like, am I smart enough? Am I supposed to be here? Do I know what I'm doing? Can I really contribute to whatever it is that I'm I'm working on. And for me, in those times, I have to, I'm going to take it a little bit of a faith angle. I understand everyone comes from different faith and religious backgrounds, but I've always reminded myself that God has prepared me for such a time as this, and that He has equipped me with to need in this moment in time. I would say for those that are coming into the field, know that God has a perfect time for everything. Everything will happen in the time that it's supposed to be happens. I would say trust that timing. I would say another way that I also look like what I think you can also use to showcase your work is LinkedIn is a very great place. I feel like when I first joined LinkedIn back in 2009 compared to now, it's very different than then. I think from then you'll just connect with people that you work with. There wasn't the place where you can look for jobs or you can reach out to someone that might be working in your particular area of work or field that you're interested in. You can at that point, you couldn't post your work. You could, like, for example, now you can post things on your LinkedIn profile, you can share other things with your network, you can apply for jobs. So I would say LinkedIn is a really great way. And I would also say, like, if there's someone that inspires you or that you look up to, if there's a way to reach out to them, whether it's for advice or mentorship or someone that can serve as a sponsor, I would say reach out to them, talk to them, even if it means just first doing an informational interview, just to really get an understanding of how did they get to where they are, what inspired their journey, and what advice would they have to others that are interested in establishing a career in this field. And I would say no matter how far someone goes in their career, there's always going to be transition challenges. We're all going to go through periods of transition. We might go into a particular job or organization, and we just really don't feel settled, or we're really just trying to find where we fit in. Going through transition, having those challenges, those are all part of the normal thing. No career is one straight line. Sometimes in life, you might have to take several detours, but overall, you'll still get to where you are. I know for me, I'm really big mentorship. I'm always open and happy to talk with those that are interested in doing this type of work. Or I also see myself as a connector. So if I might not be able to provide an opportunity, I'm always happy to reach out to people that I know and connect others with them to see if that leads to some form of opportunity, whether that's a job, mentorship, whatever it might be.
Well, that's you shared so many practical tips then, and I was just like thinking to myself, I was like, yep, this is definitely what a lot of our audience would want to hear. We've actually come to the end of this interview, and Lanice, I really want to thank you for your time. Like we said earlier, the theme for this year's International Women's Day is Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable World, or Sustainable Tomorrow. So in one sentence, what would a sustainable tomorrow look like as we work to address gender equality?
I would say a sustainable tomorrow would look like a world in where, again, men, women, boys, and everyone in all their gender diversity have equal rights, responsibilities, and opportunities. I would also say seeing a level playing field and equal rights, responsibilities, and opportunities as well for Black people as well as people of color. I think for me, that's what a sustainable tomorrow will look like. Oh, especially a world that's free of bias and discrimination, regardless if someone looks different than you or might be of a different gender or sexual orientation.
We really appreciate that, Lanice. So lastly, before we say goodbye, you had mentioned being open to, mentorship, networking, and coaching. Well, that was part of the advice you gave. So what are your social media handles, and how are the different ways people who want to connect with you can reach you?
Yeah, so you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's Lanice Williams. On Twitter, it's Lanice Shanae. So it's LANICE So you can reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn. Always happy to chat.
Thank you, Lanice. So wishing you a happy International Women's Day. Thank you for joining us on the channel today, and we hope to have you once again.
Yes, thank you for having me, and happy International Women's Day.
Thank you. Bye.